Good evening, everyone. I'm Tony Segreto, and once again, so very honored to be your host and moderator for our In the Know virtual town hall. These town halls, as you know, are an opportunity for us to share with you how UHealth, the University of Miami Health System, and the Miller School of Medicine are responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Tonight, in partnership with the University of Miami's Miami Herbert Business School, we're going to look at another very important part of this worldwide crisis. The topic tonight, and it certainly couldn't be more timely, how do we safely reopen our economy as we move into the second phase of reopening our communities? This, as you know, is such an important issue for businesses, stores, schools, and employees worldwide, not just our community. For many of us, the pandemic has meant reduced work hours, furloughs, layoffs. All those are hitting our families, friends, and loved ones extremely hard. Such a big impact. A record number of Americans are out of work. Many businesses are really struggling to survive. This economic crisis is being compared, in fact, to the Great Depression following the stock market crash of 1929. So the question is, where do we stand in terms of recovery, and what will it take to get people back on their feet financially? Well, we are very blessed and very fortunate to have with us tonight Dr. Henri Ford, the Dean and Chief Academic Officer of the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. In fact, Dean Ford will lead our question and answer session tonight, along with Stuart Miller, a member of the University of Miami Board of Trustees, Chair of the University of Miami Health System Board of Directors, Executive Chairman of Lennar Corporation, and member of Lennar's Board of Directors. And we also have John Quelch, Vice Provost of Executive Education and Dean of the Miami Herbert Business School at the University of Miami, and a Leonard M. Miller Professor as well. Now, before we get started, let's go over how you can participate in tonight's conversation. Once our experts finish their opening remarks, they will answer questions that you submitted over the last few days. You will also have the opportunity to submit questions during this program, and this is how you can do it. As you can see on the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A feature. Use that Q&A feature to submit your questions, all of which will be anonymous. And we promise we will get to as many as we possibly can. Well, now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Henri Ford, Dean and Chief Academic Officer for the Miller School of Medicine. Dr. Ford, always great to see you and see you again, sir.
Thank you, Tony. Same here. Good evening, everyone. I'm proud to join you this evening on behalf of the faculty, staff, students, and residents at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Our priority remains to be the health and safety of our community. That's the overarching priority of the Miller School. But we're also focusing on finding new diagnostic and therapeutic modalities, including a vaccine, so that we can fight this vexing virus. As you know, most of Florida is already in phase 2 of the coronavirus economic recovery plan. And Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties are expected to get there pretty soon. The go-ahead should come, fairly soon. So while it is tempting to head back to our favorite places like restaurants, gyms, and movie theaters, we still have to remember that we are in the midst of a pandemic. Although our researchers are working tirelessly to develop the proper armamentarium to combat the virus, it's also important for us to recognize that it takes time to develop a vaccine for a novel pathogen like SARS-CoV-2. It is truly a smart vaccine. That's how I try to define it. And right now, there are very, very few therapeutic options in our hands in order to actually fight the infection. One of the most important ways we can safely reopen the economy is going to be through testing and proper contact tracing. I'm happy to report that our own Dr. Sylvia Donner, who is the chair of the Department of Biochemistry, she is awaiting final FDA approval for a rapid diagnostic test that can tell patients if they have the virus in a fraction of the time that it currently takes for us to get the answer. So instead of days, they'll be able to get an answer in under a half hour. This is really a significant improvement. because that's a potential game changer to the extent that asymptomatic spread of the virus is still significant, and it may account for up to 40% of the infections that are being transmitted. So if we are able to actually rapidly detect this particular virus with this test, then we'll be able to properly regionalize the people to minimize the spread of the infection. We also know that COVID-19 is not going to be the last pandemic in our lifetime. The way we train future physicians, therefore, in understanding the widespread health consequences of a pandemic will play a major role in mitigating the health as well as the economic downfall of a pandemic in the future. So tonight, I'm glad to report that more than 25% of our medical students at the Miller School actually obtained both an MD as well as a Master's of Public Health degree simultaneously. And this really prepares them to address public health challenges at a local, regional, national, as well as international level. I'm looking forward to discussing all of these issues tonight. Thank you. Back to you, Tony.
Dean Ford, thank you so much. Now, again, before we continue, I want to remind everyone that you can submit your questions through the Q&A feature. Again, that's at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to them real shortly. Now it's time for us to switch and talk about, instead of talking about how we stay safe during the reopening of the economic impact of our university and community, we want to find out how that will, with the reopening, how will it impact us, both as a community and as a university. And with that, I am pleased to introduce Stuart Miller, a member of the University of Miami Board of Trustees. He's also the chair of the University of Miami Health System Board of Directors. He's also the executive chairman of the Lennar Corporation and member of Lennar's Board of Directors. Stuart is also an alumnus of the University of Miami School of Law, class of 1982. And as many of you are aware, the Miller family has an extraordinary legacy at the University of Miami that includes an historic $100 million gift to name the medical school in honor of the late family patriarch, Leonard M. Miller. Stuart's mother, Sue Miller, was also an extraordinary philanthropist and a passionate supporter of the university. Stuart and his siblings, Jeffrey Miller and Leslie Miller Science, continue to be very involved with the university. We are so very grateful for their continued support. And Stuart, needless to say, we go back a long way and so honored to have you with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Wow, what an introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
And your thoughts, Miller, as we go, Stuart, as we go into this, kind of give us your overview of what you think our economy is going to look like, how it's been impacted, and how we're positioned both as a community with your wearing your hat at Lennar and wearing your hat at the university, and how it impacts and how we're suited at the University of Miami to move forward.
Well, look, you know, I sometimes wonder which hat I'm supposed to wear. I have the distinct honor of working with Henri and the rest of the excellent leadership at the UHealth system. But I also have the opportunity to work with and lead a national company in thinking through how we're going to participate in reopening our business, reopening our open engagement, and how our offices are actually going to come together. You know, there's no question. We've all seen that the pandemic has really taken a toll on the economy. It has brought it to a sudden stop. It has gotten everybody to think, to be concerned, and to be focused on health and safety and hygiene. And now as we pick a moment to reopen, we have to really think through two components. Component number one is, what is the science behind being safe, being healthy, being hygienic, being able to interact? What does science tell us about the safe ways to engage that interactive environment? And number two, the thing that is not often talked about is we also have to focus on the perspectives, the perceptions of the population that we're addressing. So while one person might feel quite comfortable, another person might have more trepidation. So we really have to solve to the science, but we also have to solve to the perceptions. being sensitive to the people who are a little bit more scared or who have other people in their lives that they have to be concerned about. What might they bring home with them? Not so much, am I going to catch something, but am I going to transmit something? We've got to be very sensitive all the way through this. So the opening of the economy is going to be a delicate balance. Within the Lennar world, just to connect more dots with the university, we brought on a chief medical officer. His name, familiar to many, is Dr. Pascal Goldschmidt, who is the past dean of our medical school at the University of Miami. We call him affectionately Dr. Pascal, and he has been our guidepost as we have gone through managing the shutdown of the business, the shutdown of the economy, and migrating towards an opening. So we have a scientist that is engaged with us who is also sensitive to those perceptions. That balance is going to be how we get to an open economy and an open environment.
Stuart, thank you. Great insight. And Dr. Pascal has been with us on other town halls and just a wonderful human being, and so great that he's part of Lennar now. So let's switch now from the impact on our university and the community to the impact on the economy and the issue of sustainability in this quasi new normal, right? Every day is kind of a new normal. And now I'm pleased to introduce John Quelch. He's the Vice Provost of Executive Education, and he's the Dean of the Miami Herbert Business School at the University of Miami. Dean Quelch is an internationally recognized scholar on the marketing implications of globalization and consumer empowerment in the healthcare sector. Dean Quelch, it's a pleasure to have you on with us, sir.
Thank you very much, Tony, and it's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I also want to acknowledge the Miller family as the holder of the Leonard M. Miller University Chair. It's a great honor to be associated with that very distinguished name in these parts. We are in the midst of a recession. It's a global recession. The latest World Bank data indicates that only China among the major economies will eke out barely 0.5 to 1% GDP increase this year. The recession has caused already something like 40 million folks to have to go and file unemployment claims in the United States. We saw another 1.5 million claims being filed in the last 48 hours. This is a devastating level of not merely economic hardship, but also we have to underscore the mental health impacts of all of these events that bear upon people's daily lives and are nothing to do with anything that they did. We have now, in addition, a significant disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street, where Wall Street is almost back to where it was before the virus, presumably propped up by the fact that there are no returns to cash and that the bond markets were equally vulnerable during the near freezing of the economy, and that's led a lot of people who held bonds to now believe that it's better to hold stocks. I would not be sanguine about the stock market, and I would suggest that previous recessions would indicate that there's going to be some backsliding in terms of the market over the next year to year and a half. Significant backsliding. I'd also point out on the economic front that global supply chains have been disrupted, and those are not easily recreated in 5 minutes. So even where there are pockets of demand that come back to near normal levels, it's not obvious that the supply chains will be able to put in place the goods and services that the demand wishes to absorb. All of that having been said, I think that businesses are finally understanding something that those of us who straddle public health and business have long advocated for, and that is that community health is a really important responsibility and component of being a business leader. And just to give you an illustration of that, if you're running a retail operation, if you're running a supermarket, for example, if the community in which you are operating is unhealthy, the citizens in that community will not have as much money to spend on the goods that you're selling in your stores. In addition, the workforce in your store, which you will draw from the community, will also be more vulnerable to be ill and therefore absent and less productive. Apart from the fact they're probably caring for other family members at home as well. And so a healthy community is really extremely important to a healthy economy. And I think we really need to bear that in mind when we weigh the trade-offs that are associated with the pace of reopening. And I like the way that Stuart also couched the point around individuals have different levels of risk aversion in these circumstances. And we have to be mindful and respectful as leaders of businesses or public leaders in the political sphere of the differences that people have in respect to their willingness to go back out and take what for some people may be no risk, but for other people may be an enormous risk. And I think that those are the trade-offs that have to be weighed as we think about the pace with which it is sensible to reopen.
Dean Quelch, thank you so much. Just based on the three opening statements, this is going to be an amazing evening. All right, so we're going to go to our question and answer period here. And Dean Ford, we're going to start with you with a couple of questions within one. So this was sent in to us earlier. If I go to a restaurant or business where people are not wearing masks, is it safe for me to be there? How can we safely eat unmasked in a restaurant if it's been shown that air conditioning currents can spread the virus 50 feet or more? Dean Ford.
That's a great question, Tony, and one that all restaurant owners and many citizens have to deal with. We have to recognize that the way the virus spreads is primarily in closed spaces. So when you're in a restaurant where the air distribution is really not that great, and you're there for hours at a time, so 2-3 hours, the chances of having a virus spread would be far more significant. But what is happening is that even within the restaurants, they are practicing safe distancing. So making sure that the tables are far enough apart. So if the tables are far enough apart, 6 feet or more, the chances that a particular viral particle is going to travel all the way over to your place where you're sitting, you are minimizing them. It's not zero, but the chances are far less likely. And if we control the density of the restaurant, and it's really not packed, by definition, if we're moving tables sufficiently apart, then you're not going to confront that particular concern. Now, if you are ultra compulsive and extremely worried, then you may just want to inspect the seating arrangement when you get to the restaurant and see if it actually meets your expectations. Otherwise, you can ask to sit on the patio if that's an option, because we know that the likelihood of contracting the virus while you're outdoors is far less than when you are in an enclosed space. I think those are the critical things to consider.
Dean Ford, thank you. Dean Quelch, these next questions are for you. Should employers reevaluate telecommuting as a permanent workplace fixture? And is this a more cost-effective option for employers in the long term? Dean Quelch.
Many employers have been engaged in telecommuting for some years now, but what has happened in this particular crisis is that trend has been accelerated. And a large number of employees who have not previously been involved in telecommuting have now become involved. I had a small op-ed in the Orlando Sun-Sentinel a couple of weeks ago where I relayed the story of an investment counselor for one of the major mutual fund companies who previously was making 5 calls per day on high net worth clients in their offices. He was driving about 75 or 80 miles a day. He was stopping at Starbucks 3 times for a coffee in between. With the virus, he is now making 7 calls per day from his home. He is sleeping better at night because he is not having 3 cups of coffee every day. He is not stressed or wasting time driving. And he's going for a morning jog every day, whereas previously he found it hard to find time to exercise. For this particular type of individual, it's a win for him, it's a win for the employer. But there are other cases that we've heard about where people who are especially high-touch managers find it very much more difficult to manage by walking around virtually than they do in the physical environment of their office. And so for them, the managing of employees who are telecommuting is a challenge. It's a challenge that can be overcome. It's a challenge that can be overcome through better procedural management so that employees have specific tasks that they know they have to do and report on with specific, well understood and shared metrics where the employer and the employee is on the same page. It can become a major productivity enhancement, but at the moment, there are some people who see it as a win and some people who see it as a loss.
Dean Quelch, thank you. Stuart, as a leader within the real estate field, what will the impact be on commercial real estate if the trend moves toward more people working remotely? And I also know as things have progressed that people are looking at things virtually in such a way where they may be investing in something without actually being there physically to invest.
So I'm going to tag my answer on to where John Quelch was going, the question of telecommuting and how that's going to affect the business environment. Even we old dogs are learning new tricks right now. The reality is that everybody has been forced to rethink the way that the office works, and we've all learned a little bit more about what technology can offer. So I wouldn't say that we're going to lean all the way one way or all the way another, but there's going to be a rebalancing because for all of us, just as Dean Quelch highlighted, there are many who are going to find that they don't have to travel quite as much. They don't have to spend quite as much time in an office as your question raised. And there's going to be a rebalancing. That rebalancing is going to ripple through all forms of real estate, from commercial to residential. On the residential side, and I can tell you that we have been focused on rethinking how we incorporate a proper home office into the home. And a proper home office means it's got to be properly soundproofed so that the kids and the dog and the other things that dominate home life don't interrupt the business part of that life. And with that will come some of the telecommuting pieces that will feather into the overall operations of businesses and will make businesses more productive. On the commercial side of business, there seems to be a belief right now, and I don't think you can ever decide what's actually going to happen in the midst of crisis. You have to let things settle and see what actually happens. But it seems that the demand for office space is going to be impacted. Companies and people are going to need less office space, less time in the office, and there will be, in that rebalancing, probably a curtailment in the need for offices. On the other side of that equation, people are going to have to rethink what has become the modern day version of offices, which is less office space per person, more people huddled together. So the question becomes, are we going to need more spreading in offices and therefore expand the amount of office we need? So these cross currents are revealing themselves. They're going to play out over time, and you're going to see these questions get raised in all forms of real estate. Home office, do we need as much office space? What's going to happen to retail? How is industrial going to feather into this? All of these questions are going to be resolved as the world settles and we find a new normal.
Great insight. Stuart, thank you. Dean Ford, this was just sent to us. Can you comment on a role for point of care diagnostic testing or other technology approaches to reducing the risk of reopening businesses, schools, and other enterprises?
Another excellent question. This is exactly what we're talking about in the context of that rapid diagnostic test that we are developing, or that Dr. Donner is waiting for FDA approval on. What it allows you to do is get the results within a matter of 30 minutes or less as to whether or not someone is infected. And to the extent that you know you have the results immediately, then you can properly direct that person. You can be, that person should be sent home to more or less self-isolate, or should that person happen to be symptomatic, then you can actually direct the person to the COVID ward and initiate treatment. So having a point of care option really is going to help us protect the citizenry. And you can imagine if we got to the point where this test was even more rapid, you could even actually do that safely while waiting to be seated in a restaurant. And again, people would be able to sit and have their dinner with greater ease. It doesn't mean that tomorrow you couldn't contact the virus, but the whole idea of having a rapid diagnostic test really would ensure our ability to safely channel people to the right environment, and without risking the possibility of further infection.
Dean Ford, thank you. Dean Quelch, this was just sent in as well. Given that many people working in Miami-Dade in multiple fields, such as tourism, airlines, foreign banks, construction, second residences are coming and going for areas around the Dade County and Miami area with various levels of COVID-19, what is the best manner of opening up in a global hub? Dean Quelch.
This is a very important issue for all major metro areas, not just in the US, but internationally as well. And I think it's a very difficult challenge because so much of the economy in our city and in our county depends on international activity. To some degree, that activity can be substituted for via teleconferencing, but in the final analysis, the tourism sector does depend heavily on people moving into the area. Now, in a typical recession, what you find is that folks, when they go on holiday, start back on holiday staying really quite close to home. Most people do not wish to take a holiday or the risk of taking a holiday an international long-haul trip. So controlling the ports becomes a little bit less, it's a little bit easier because you have, I think, in the initial opening, fewer people traveling internationally than you would normally have. And also, of course, many business people will not be traveling as much as Stuart already indicated. So a lot depends upon controlling the folks coming in to the port, to the airport, and to the seaport as well, for that matter. I think the main difficulty arises with respect to travelers from contiguous states or communities where there is a more rapid reopening than there is in our location. If that happened to be the case, because obviously there's more risk of transportation of infected people into our environment if there is a wave occurring in a contiguous state which has a much more relaxed approach to reopening. So I don't know enough about the approaches, temperature checking, etc., to know whether or not these are worth the investment to implement in order to try and control for people coming in from the outside with the virus. You know, we have seen in Singapore, for example, a pretty good result until there was a second wave of the virus that was caused by migrant workers coming back into Singapore. And that sort of evidence suggests that it's really very problematic when you have at least 50, if not more, jurisdictions in this country operating on a different approach.
Dean Quelch, thank you so much. Stuart, and I talked about this in the last question, how are you rethinking the home selling experience during COVID-19? And I know kind of virtual tours have become a big thing, right?
Yes, they have. The home selling experience has been changing very, very rapidly over the past couple of months. The trend had already begun even before the current circumstances, but there's been a complete rewiring, as you might well expect, as it relates to existing homes, not new homes, existing homes. There's a great deal of reluctance for people who might want to sell their home to invite buyers in to look at their home. And likewise, buyers are not so inclined to go into a home to look at it. So the advent of using either FaceTime or other technologies to have a digital experience in looking at a home, three-dimensional drawings, three-dimensional architecture as a mechanism for showing homes has become very important in the selling process. And a great, you did ask the question in your last question to me, will people actually transact and buy without actually going and visiting the home? We actually have numerous experiences exactly like that we've transacted over the past couple of months, where people have gotten to us digitally, they've toured a home digitally, they've done a three-dimensional tour on their computer in their own living room, and they've actually transacted through a digital contract and a digital transmission of a down payment. And even all the way through the closing, almost everything can be done digitally today. That rewiring has been happening, and it's getting better and better, with user interface and user experiences getting better for people and less frictionless. And it's going to become a big wave of the way real estate is transacted in the future.
That's just absolutely incredible. Dean Ford, are we seeing more cases of multi-symptom inflammatory syndrome related to COVID-19 in children?
Indeed, Tony. It is really an unusual problem. We have heard for so long that children are really not easily infected. They seem to be relatively resistant. That's the word that has been used. But we know that's not necessarily the case. And we have now seen a cohort of children who are presenting with a fairly aggressive inflammatory disorder that affects multiple organs. And in most instances, these are children who have been exposed to the virus. We have seen quite a few severe cases in our own health system where parents may have been infected, the children had been relatively asymptomatic, but then they present in heart failure, in multi-system organ failure, and that affects not just their heart, but also their kidneys, sometimes their lungs. So it's a real problem. How do we know which children are going to be impacted? It is absolutely too early to tell. But rest assured that we're going to continue to study the cohort of children to see what are the specific characteristics that could predict the likelihood of these children developing this multi-organ inflammatory syndrome. And it happens to, in some cases, to very healthy children. So So that's what's really baffling about it. And for us, we are seeing the evolution of a brand new disease. But we will get to the bottom of it.
Dean Ford, thank you. Dean Quelch, we just had this sent to us. Can you talk about the prospects for consumer inflation in the short, medium, and long term? Does the infusion of cash by the Fed facilitate inflation?
So in the immediate short term, I don't see any particularly strong inflationary pressure because, after all, with the number of people out of work at the moment, the prospect for wage inflation is extremely low. But in the medium to long term, the level of fiscal stimulus and monetary intervention that was associated with ensuring the economy did not freeze, that's creating a massive increase in the debt. And that has to be, of course, paid in terms of interest on the debt. So there is probably a pressure towards inflation, but I would not expect it to be evident for around about 2 to 3 years at least.
Thank you so much, Dean Quelch. For Stuart, is our local economy positioned to bounce back, or do you foresee prolonged impacts?
I think the answer is both. I think that the economy is definitely poised to bounce back. We can already see evidence that people are coming back to restaurants somewhat slowly, but they're coming back. People want to experience life outside their home, and that people are looking to engage. And I think that engagement is going to grow and will continue as long as we don't have a significant surge around the corner. At the same time, when we grind our economy to an immediate halt, there will be ripples and there will be impacts that will be with us for some time. This, the economic impact will not clear immediately. And unfortunately, there will be a much higher unemployment rate for some time to come. We know, as Dean Quelch highlighted, we have 40 million Americans that are filing for unemployment benefits, and they're not all going to be able to come right back to work. Many of the companies across the country have been learning how to operate much more effectively and efficiently. And that means that there will be embedded job loss. So instead of rebounding to a 3.5% unemployment rate, it might be an 8 to a 10% unemployment rate, and then perhaps start migrating down. That means that we're going to have an extended time with some slower growth and some impacts to the economy. But with that said, I'm optimistic about where we're headed, because over time, and given the fact that, number one, the government acted very quickly with stimulus, and it was bipartisan, very big rarity, and the prospects for additional stimulus, I think that we could see stability leading to growth and ultimately recovery, but it's going to take some time.
Stuart, while I have you here, we just had this sent in to us. So the question is from one of our participants: can you outline what needs to be done at Lennar when one employee develops COVID-19, and how long to close the office, cleaning, employees, testing, et cetera, et cetera? How is this all impacting Lennar, and what are your protocols?
So housing has been an essential business. It has been kept alive, working, and operating through the downturn or through this time off. Our offices have not been open. We've learned, in fact, how to operate our business through digital interaction, and we've rewired ourselves. But all the way through this downturn, we've had to navigate that very question because we do have certain offices that are open, as we've provided shelter and homes for people who are already in the queue and had already purchased. So we, as I noted before, hired a chief medical officer. The very first thing that we do is, if we have an instance of a COVID-19 positive associate, we immediately put it in the hands of Dr. Pascal. Dr. Pascal has been engaged all the way through the downturn, and as we come back to the offices, we'll continue to be engaged in thinking through the circumstances, the facts, and what actually has to happen. It's not a one size fits all. If one of our associates is tested positive, we have to start tracing backwards to their points of contact. And we have very carefully crafted protocols as to when and where was the point of contact. And depending on that, what sort of quarantine protocol will be followed by all of the associates that have come in contact with that one individual. If it's a broad form of contact, then the entire office will be shut down and quarantined for a prescribed period of time. So I leave it to the professionals, and I daylight that it's a combination, I say again, of science and perception, recognizing that we have to keep people safe. And our chief medical officer helps us navigate that path. And at the same time, the perceptions of everyone in the office as to whether they are hygienically being cared for and whether they have a safe environment, that also dictates our quarantine protocols and how we react to it.
Stuart, thank you so much. Dean Ford, this question was just sent in. So if the taking of temperature when you attend a restaurant or a store is not effective, why do it? What exactly does taking the temperature do for the consumer other than psychologically making them feel that they're okay? Please address the use of masks as well as goggles when traveling, especially on airplanes. Dean Ford, this is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A great question. So you cannot be completely reassured if just because you don't have a temperature, because temperatures are cyclical. You may have the virus and not have a temperature depending on what time you happen to be tested. And so therefore, in and of itself, it does not absolve you of the possibility that you are infected. Having said that, if you happen to be symptomatic, then we know that you should not be allowed in. So I think the value is if it's positive. So if you have a temperature, if you have a fever, and you have other symptomatology that would suggest that you may be infected, then it tells us that you should not come in contact with others, especially a vulnerable population. I think that's the proper utility of it. You cannot dismiss it, but if you happen to know it's there, then it's quite useful information to have. But it's not foolproof that I don't have a fever, I don't have a virus. We know that's not the case because we talked about asymptomatic transmission being a significant mode of community-acquired infection. I think the second part had to do with utilization of masks and goggles in airplanes. I think that's absolutely the right approach if we're going to minimize the risk of infection. Let's face it, to get the infection, the critical formula is the number of virus particles that are being shed times the length of exposure. How many hours or minutes you're going to be in contact. So if you imagine if you're going to be in a closed space where air ventilation is quite limited, it's quite restricted, and somebody is shedding the virus, let's say that person, if the person coughs in an airplane, and if that person's not wearing a mask, that virus is probably expelled. That individual is expelling maybe 3,000 droplets that are traveling 50 miles an hour, so they could be all the way in the back of the airplane. And God forbid if they should sneeze, now we're talking about maybe 30,000 droplets traveling at 200 miles an hour. So that's why wearing a mask becomes critical. It's critical for you to protect yourself, even if you're asymptomatic, but it's also particularly important if you happen to be symptomatic to protect everybody else. But if you're symptomatic, you should not be getting on an airplane because that is absolutely, that would be irresponsible in that, especially in this day and age, and given our awareness of the potential risks associated with this virus. So we have to be responsible citizens. We have to take precaution not to infect others, especially vulnerable people who have to maybe get on that plane for other reasons. So I think whatever you can do to protect yourself, wearing goggles, wearing a mask when you're going to get in a plane, that is highly recommended.
Dean Ford, thank you so much. Dean Quelch, what are your feelings on the pandemic's impact on the economy? And now that we are in a recession, do you believe it will be short-lived? Dean Quelch.
So many people, I think, Tony, believe and hope that it will be a V-shaped recovery. In other words, that there will be a very rapid bounce back. I would be a little bit more cautious than that. I think there will be potential for a reopening in the short run, but almost regardless of whether or not there's a second wave of the virus, it's quite likely that the economy next year will slow down a little bit again. It obviously will be a positive GDP growth in 2021, but perhaps not as substantial as some people would like to think. And one of the reasons for that is, I think, what Stuart mentioned, which is that a significant portion of the 40 million people affected by this situation are not going to be able to come back to the jobs that they previously had. Business is moving on and reinventing itself, and I would like to echo as well Stuart's optimism for the future, despite the short-term travails that the economy is going to be put under. I remember very well that Bill Gates founded Microsoft in the middle of a recession. Jack Bogle founded Vanguard in the middle of a recession. E-Trade was founded in a recession. There is no shortage of opportunity for reinventing business practices and developing new companies that bring solutions to consumers in this new environment. And I believe that there will be a wave of innovation that will emanate from this recession that we will look back on 10 years from now and be astonished at the net positive impact that came out of this seemingly appalling situation that we're currently in.
Dean Quelch, I'm going to keep you here because we just had this sent in, and I think this is important. Can you comment on the long-term impact on the healthcare industry, trends that were already present, such as telemedicine? Is this going to continue to accelerate? And to the continued financial viability of rural small hospitals that have seen closures over the past few years?
Well, I think one of the things that this particular pandemic has highlighted is the existence of health disparities between those who have and those who do not have in our society. And, to be frank about it, for the richest country in the world to have the health statistic record that we have and to have the health disparities that we have is pretty unbelievable, and certainly in my mind unacceptable. So for the longer term, we will have to figure out how to deliver not necessarily world-class healthcare to every rural hamlet in America, but certainly a better and more consistent level of healthcare than is currently being delivered. Now, some people believe that telemedicine and telehealth will contribute to that. But I think one of the things that we've perhaps seen from this pandemic is the fact that a very infectious virus in society can shut down the entire health system or preoccupy the entire health system at the expense of people who are, in need of weekly, if not daily, treatments at hospitals. And of course, we also have the many elective surgeries that have been foregone, and no doubt someone will eventually do a computation of the negative health consequences and even deaths of all of those folks who were too scared to show up at a hospital because of the risk of getting the virus. So what does that say? What it says is that you need to think about how to segregate your delivery systems so that you're not delivering in the same single structure, the same single environment, treatments for infectious virus patients along with all of these other patients. And so some mechanisms to segregate the population, the patient population, in a way that distances the individuals who don't have the virus but need the treatments from those who do have the virus. There needs to be some flexibility and restructuring built into the way the healthcare system delivers its services, so that these segments can be segments of consumers and patients can be separated.
Hey, Tony, can I just chime in here for a second and say, just a bright light in kind of a darker corner here is our University of Miami healthcare system. I was able, as chair, to be able to watch our executive team do a magnificent job of focusing on their partnership with our community health system at Jackson, and to provide the very best of care, all the way from testing to caring for patients, and have emerged from this very difficult time frame and an even better version of itself. They've elevated their game. They've worked hard. I think that they've been able to manage the finances, and I think that our health system, the U Health system, has learned, has grown, and has stabilized itself in the toughest of time. We talked a little bit about, and Dean Quelch highlighted, that innovation will be a bright spot as we go forward. In fact, Scott Galloway, professor at NYU's Business School, echoes the same thing, that many new innovations will bring us forward and illuminate opportunities for the future. I think that our health system, as I've watched it go through this difficult time, has found leadership, has found bright lights and opportunities. And I hope that's the case for many health systems, that will find better ways, innovative ways to better serve our communities as we go forward. But hats off to our U Health system. Henri and the rest of the group has done a stellar job.
Absolutely, could not agree with you more, Stuart. And I think it's so nice to be able to say, let's look at the bright lights rather than the ones that are dimming, because we get hit with those dimming lights all day. To look at a bright light gives us hope, and I think that's what everybody's looking for. Listen, we do have a question for Dean Ford before we go, and Stuart, thank you for weighing in on that. That was wonderful. Dean Ford, what is the best strategy to opening schools and universities in the fall? In particular, how to keep teachers who may be older or have pre-existing conditions safe?
I think that's a million-dollar question that just about all the major schools, universities are contemplating. And we can really separate things into two categories. First, let's talk about our public schools, where our children go. And here we really have to follow the guidelines that the American Academy of Pediatrics has been putting out. And we also need to take the opportunity to learn from other countries that are trying to safely reopen their schools. So for the number one necessity is really the availability of testing and contact tracing, because that's going to be quite important. And of course, you have to have robust infection control measures, such as being able to disinfect the classroom surfaces, screen the children and staff, especially if they have fevers, or obviously if they're symptomatic, parents have to keep them home. Try to get them to use masks as appropriately as possible, but we know that's going to be a formidable challenge. And some of the schools are wrestling with whether or not you open for a limited number of hours for different grades. So all of those questions will need to be answered. And we have to have plans for children who have more high-risk medical conditions, because we obviously cannot afford to expose them to the virus. And then what happens to the sports team? So again, major questions that need to be addressed, but if we're addressing them in conjunction with the guidelines that the American Academy of Pediatrics is putting out, and also learn from a number of Asian countries that have opened and they seem to be opening safely, then we may learn something. I know in China that the students get temperature checks before they can enter the school. Well, remember the caveat that we talked about temperatures. In Sydney, Australia, that's where they're opening really in staggered stages. In Hong Kong, Japan, they're trying the same approach. So we will have a whole lot of data for us to evaluate so we can come up with an effective strategy to open our schools. Now, as far as the university is concerned, that the same considerations apply. We have to have point of care testing readily available at all times. We have to have enough rooms for proper physical separation. The whole notion of eating in a cafeteria has to be looked at with a different lens. We can't have everybody congregating all the time like we used to. But I think that there will be ways to make this happen. It is problematic, and when it comes to the professors who are, say older than 60 and maybe far more vulnerable than our more resilient students, who are in their 18 to 20-year-olds who seem to be far more robust and resistant. And could they be asymptomatic carriers, or even they may not be symptomatic, but they could still transmit it to the professors and others. And this is where we are looking at de-densifying as many areas as possible. So making sure we're not in a classroom with 50 or 100 or so people. Find ways to focus primarily on small group learning. And those are all the strategies that I know our leadership is currently working on. And we hope to have a more comprehensive plan in the next several weeks, certainly well before the start of classes. So we are contemplating all of those critical interventions, but we believe that we will be able to safely open in August and deliver the curriculum that the way it's meant to be delivered, while practicing all of the safety precautions that we can imagine to ensure the safety of our students, but also of all the other employees, including the professors.
Dean Ford, thank you. And thank you, Stuart Miller, Dean Quelch, for participating in tonight's In the Know Town Hall. I think this has been a remarkable hour. I think you'll all agree with me that this was an extraordinary evening. As an alumnus myself, I hope you at home watching are as proud and as deeply impressed as I am, that we have incredibly passionate and brilliant people guiding us through this turbulent time. The U is definitely in great hands. A reminder, a full recording of this program will be posted online. You can look for that link in your email. That'll be coming to you in the coming days. And if you would like to support UHealth's response to COVID-19, visit uhealthemergencyrelief.com. From all of us here at the University of Miami, we wish you and your family good health. Stay safe. And remember, it's all about the U. Good night, everyone.